Hello everyone, I am here. My weekly movie and television show review, a portion of the video will be saved for the end. I've got quite a few entries that I need to talk about there. As far as the wrestling side of things go, I originally planned on including previews and predictions for both Bound for Glory and Hell in a Cell, but since Bound for Glory is happening tonight and Hell in a Cell is happening tomorrow, I don't see much of a reason to do a full-fledged preview at this point, and everything I have to say about the shows can be saved for reviews of both shows. So I'll probably do a review of both shows early in the week, like Monday or Tuesday. So that is that. Also, the latest episode of Weekday Warriors of Wrestling, Eric and I did not get a chance to record last night. He's going through adulting things as far as like getting his apartment set up and everything, so that kind of got in the way of that. So, but we are planning to record sometime later today, and we'll probably post it within the next couple of days, probably early next week. And the problem that I caused the last time will not be a problem this time, which is good. So there's that. So yeah, but on the wrestling side of things, I did want to talk about two things. One being the G1 Climax, which wrapped up. I was able to see the finals finally on Wednesday. So I do want to talk about that, even though it feels a little late. And I want to talk about this week's Dynamite, because good God, I've got to mention that segment with Jericho and MJF. So I'll start with the G1 Climax, the 30th G1 Climax. This one won by Kota Ibushi, winning his second G1 Climax in a row, third year in a row making it to the finals. And it looks like he's poised to walk out of Wrestle Kingdom as the double champion. We will see how all of that plays out. Wrestle Kingdom is once again going to be a two-night event. And it'll be interesting to see what Kota's role is in how everything plays out. This year, he was kind of the big loser coming out of both shows, where he lost both nights. When I thought there was a possibility he could walk out with both belts, and he wound up just being the big loser that weekend. So it'll be interesting to see if this is the night where Kota finally gets that big win and finally becomes the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. So, what were my thoughts on the G1 Climax as a whole? Did I enjoy it? What were the things I liked about it? Overall, I did enjoy it. It was great to see, like, traditional wrestling shows again with, like, a crowd that's reacting to stuff, which in this day and age is a welcome commodity. And it was nice to get those legitimate crowd reactions. It was nice to see so many of the talents that were included in this. And it was just very entertaining all the way through. I generally enjoyed it. It was nice to see all the different little storylines and different match types that were happening throughout the thing. You got that kick fest between Ibushi and Taichi the day before the finals, which was very, very good. Or it was the last A-block show before the finals, I should say, in the match that's solidified Kota Ibushi as making it to the finals, I do believe. And yeah, I like stuff like that where it's just different. It's different from the standard, wrestling match formula, and it stands out because of that. So I really enjoyed that. Tomohiro Ishii had some of the best performances of his career throughout this thing. I really enjoyed the match he had with... the match with Okada was very good. I also really enjoyed the match he had with Suzuki. I thought that was very good. Okada started using the money clip as a finisher to give him a different dimension throughout this thing and started winning matches by submission, which is different for him. So that was cool to see people changing their strategies and adapting to this format. So that was great. And you had Will Ospreay, who cheated to beat Okada in at the end of the tournament with help from, I forget the name of the hired thug that's there. The name is slipping me, but B. Priestley was also there to help Will Ospreay. So heel turn incoming for Will Ospreay. It was also good to see him doing his thing, and he performed very well throughout this thing as well. And, of course, Yano, always a hoot. Yano just brings a different flavor to things and gives people... first of all, he gives the people he works with a break where they don't have to kill themselves. And he has a very entertaining chemistry with a lot of people. I really enjoyed his match with Naito, especially since Naito had... one of the major story points was that he had the longest matches of the tournament by far, and Yano had the shortest matches of the tournament by far. So when they finally cross paths, you get that thing where it's like, okay, we got the guy who has the shortest matches versus the guy who has the longest matches. Let's see who's able to kind of dictate the pace here. And I just generally enjoyed the tournament all the way around. Now, I did not watch every single match because I just don't have time to do that. Although, the format for the shows this year was a lot shorter than the norm. And they were very easy shows to watch, generally, because it was like you get a young boy match, and then you get the four or five tournament matches, and that's it. You don't get blasted with a bunch of tag matches. It's not overly complicated. It's just boom, 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 then you're done. And I watched a couple of the Young Boy matches, and they were pretty solid. Some of those guys showed promise. But generally, I just kind of stayed with the tournament matches that I knew were going to interest me, and the ones that I wanted to watch. So I've never, in the last few years that I've been checking out the G1 Climax, I've never watched every single tournament match because I just don't have the time. But the ones I did watch, and I did watch most of them, I would say I watched at least 80% of them, I generally enjoyed them. And it was just fun to see traditional wrestling again with, legitimate crowd reactions, which in 2020 is definitely welcomed. And I think New Japan has set themselves up quite nicely for Wrestle Kingdom, and we'll see how all of that goes. Last year, or this year, when they did Wrestle Kingdom and it was a 2-night event, I felt like they had plenty of material to cover a 2-night show. Now, with COVID and everything kind of blasting everything to hell, and New Japan basically having, not start over, but having to kind of rebuild and get back to normalcy, I wonder, how are they going to fill a 2-night event for Wrestle Kingdom? I don't know. We'll see how they do it. Obviously, we've got Okada versus Ospreay to look forward to. We've got Ibushi going after Naito. Looks like the likely situation here. I also, going back to the finals, I thought it was very interesting that they picked Sonata to work Ibushi in the finals. Granted, I do like Sonata more than Evil. Evil's a guy that keeps getting big pushes, and I'm like, I don't understand it. I don't see it in him. I'm sorry. I don't see it in him, and I never really have. But Sonata, I like more than Evil, but he's not firmly established as a top guy yet. So that was kind of a weird pick for Ibushi. You would have thought it would have been Okada, or even though they were in the same block, you would think it would have been Naito or Tanahashi would have been the one, or even Evil, just based on the fact that he had been pushed as heavily as he was. But going with Sonata was I guess a surprise. I thought the match they had was good. But it was I just kind of want Ibushi to win that. When you pitched that match to me, I was there's no real intrigue there. I just want Ibushi to win in that situation. And he did, so there was that. But overall, I did really enjoy the tournament. It was, like I said, it was nice to see something that was traditional again. So that was always great. So the G1 Climax gets a thumbs up for me. I really liked it. Now let's talk about AEW, and specifically the segment they did this week between MJF and Chris Jericho, which turned into a show tune in the spirit of Bing Crosby and Bob Hope, those old, if anybody's familiar with the old Road to movies, like Road to Morocco, Road to Singapore, and all those other ones. I think they did 7 in total. And it was something to behold, to say the least. And I'm kind of conflicted on how I feel about it, to be perfectly honest. There's 2 camps right now. People either loved it or they fucking hated it. And you can guess who probably hated it and who probably liked it. But what I will say is that I thought the segment was generally well produced, except for the fact that it clearly wasn't in a real restaurant. It was clearly in some studio somewhere, and so that kind of the set looked kind of fake. But the dancing and the singing, especially from MJF, I'm like, oh my god, that dude can sing. What the fuck? Is there anything that guy can't do? That was all pretty good and entertaining. I think viewed in a vacuum, the segment is entertaining and worked in that regard when viewed on its own. And just to use an example, if this is a thing that popped up on an old Coliseum video, because I've talked about this, some of the old Coliseum videos that I used to watch are go to Paul Bearer's house and he gives you a tour of his funeral parlor home and that kind of goofy stuff, or Bobby Heenan and Mean Gene Okerlund on a golf course giving golf tips and all this other nuttiness. That stuff is okay on a random video filled with random matches and things that don't really connect to anything. It's okay, this is fun. And, it's fun to watch. I enjoyed it. But in the middle of a wrestling show that's supposed to build storylines and maintain the illusion of a real sporting event, it was very jarring and clashed with the rest of the show because it sticks out like a sore thumb. Now, some people may even say that's a plus. And I'm all for being creative and trying to find new ways to present pro wrestling because it's especially in this day and age, we're dealing with COVID and everything, it's you got to find something to do. And that's one of the reasons, so many people were ready to bash the Thunderdome. I'm like, guys, it's something. I'll give them credit for trying something. Even Raw Underground, I was willing to give it a chance. It ultimately didn't work because it was kind of a half-baked idea that they didn't really put a lot of thought into like a direction for it, and there was no like stakes involved in it. It was just a bunch of random fights that didn't mean anything. So that was what went wrong there. But generally, it's like, look, in this day and age, it's like you got to come up with something. So I give him credit for coming up with something. And Y2J, Chris Jericho, and MJF are clearly talented guys. And I don't know, like, this segment could have come off a lot worse if it wasn't them in the part. And going back to WWE, things that I've criticized them for is when, I remember a few years ago, actually when I first started doing this channel, and WWE was really leaning into that, like, we're basically Saturday Night Live with, like, guest hosts and things like that. Like, WrestleMania 27 was basically, like, WWE's attempt at trying to be Saturday Night Live. And I was like, my immediate reaction to that was like, oh, they're trying to be Saturday Night Live, and, you know, they're trying to be entertainment and all this other stuff. And my immediate reaction was, yeah, but they suck at it. Like, they're terrible at being like Saturday Night Live. So even if, like, presenting wrestling like Saturday Night Live was a good idea, and we can have a debate of whether or not it is a good idea, WWE sucks at executing it, so it's like, well, fuck you, you suck at it. So I don't even care if that's what your end game is, you're terrible at it. And here, at least like MJF and Y2J are able to carry something like that and make it like show off their skills and make it kind of work. And like I said, I like a good show tune as much as the next guy, whether it be, you know, showing up in a random comedy like Family Guy or like the aforementioned Bob Hope, Bing Crosby Road to movies that I talked about. Which are fun movies. I highly recommend them, especially if you're a fan of like old-style comedies. I think they're worth a look. And they were very influential on many things, including Family Guy. Like the Stewie Bryan Road to episodes were heavily influenced by those movies. And I remember Duckman did a whole episode that was basically just a Bing Crosby, Bob Hope Road to movie. And there was also that movie that DreamWorks did. What was it? I think it was called Road to El Dorado, and that was heavily influenced by it. So it's one of those things that I think a lot of people my age and younger don't appreciate and don't understand or aren't familiar with. But it had an influence on a bunch of things that we do know about. And I think they're worth a look. So just throwing that out there. But you expect to see those show tunes in a Bing Crosby, Bob Hope movie, not in the middle of a wrestling show. But then again, like, to play devil's advocate, you know, when Steve Austin and the NWO were first coming up, you didn't expect them to do the things that they were doing. But they were doing things that people considered cool, while this is kind of old-fashioned. I don't know. I'm just throwing my hands up and going, I don't know. And again, if this was something like, perfect example, the Slammy Awards. Vince McMahon's doing his whole stand back thing. It's like, that's perfect for a thing like the Slammy Awards. That is absolutely acceptable for something like that. In the middle of an episode of Raw, probably not. It would be way too jarring. And I think that's kind of this weird like middle road that AEW's in right now. In a vacuum, if they had just released that on the internet, I don't think anybody would have complained about it. But the fact that it was right in the middle of Dynamite while we're trying to like get invested in stories and matches and everything else, it just comes across as really, really jarring and clashes with the rest of the show. And so, while I respect the effort and I acknowledge the talent of those involved and the production and everything that went into making it, I think it was well made in a lot of respects. It was probably not the best thing to include in the middle of an episode of Dynamite, but then again, I do respect trying to be creative. So, it sounds like I'm fence riding, but if it were up to me, I probably wouldn't have included it on the show. But then again, I'm not a wrestling promoter, and if I knew, if I had the solution to what would like make wrestling the coolest thing on planet Earth, I would do it myself. But I don't know. I'm no creative genius, and I fully acknowledge that. And I have no business getting involved in the wrestling business outside of me just making stupid videos on YouTube. And I fully acknowledge that. But, so yeah, I guess I would sum it up as I fully respect the effort, the execution. Even the execution wasn't all that bad. It's just putting it right in the middle of an episode of Dynamite was a little jarring. And you know what? If they'd put it in AEW Dark, maybe it would have made Dark worth watching for once. Because Dark is weird because it keeps getting longer. And it's just 14 like squash matches, and that's basically the show. And it's like, man, they're really That show's just not paced very well. The only thing I'm really digging on Dark right now is the Peter Avalon Brandon Cutler feud, because it's like the two men battling over who gets their first win, and I'm like, I want to see who actually gets that first win out of those two. So, but in any case, those are my thoughts on the segment. I didn't like hate it. I want to make that perfectly clear. I absolutely did not hate it. I'm sure Jim Cornette did. I haven't listened to his comments on it, but I'm sure he hated it. But for me, it was just like, yeah, it's a little odd to happen right in the middle of an episode of Dynamite. But, respect the effort for trying, I guess. So that concludes my wrestling talk for this week. Like I said, I'm going to have reviews for Bound for Glory and Hell in a Cell coming up. And also, we've got NXT Halloween Havoc coming up next week, so that should be a lot of fun. So I want to talk about that as well, because I've been saying for a while I want Halloween Havoc to make a comeback, and they're doing it. So we'll see what they actually do with it. So hopefully it's a good show, because goddamn NXT needs something, because they've lost a lot of their energy, and they've also been kind of hit by the injury bug too. So it would be nice to see them bounce back with something colorful and fun. Speaking of colorful and fun, it's time for me to get into my movies and television shows weekly reviews. And this week, I concluded watching yet another Disney afternoon show, one that is fairly appropriate for Halloween, given how the darker elements of the character and how some of the episodes were very obviously Halloween themed. But Darkwing Duck, a show that I adored as a child, one of my favorite shows from the Disney afternoon lineup, and the character recently made a return to the new DuckTales series. This week, they just did a 1-hour episode showcasing Darkwing Duck in a new setting, which may end up being like a backdoor pilot to a new Darkwing Duck show, which I would not be opposed to that, because what they've done with DuckTales has been pretty good, and I would be fully in favor of them giving similar treatment to Darkwing Duck. And if this episode is any indication, it's like, all right, they've put a lot of thought into Darkwing Duck. You almost feel like they want to do Darkwing Duck more than they do DuckTales, because they did spend a lot of time like setting up Darkwing and getting him ready to be introduced in this new DuckTales universe. But Darkwing Duck was a show that aired on the Disney Afternoon, also aired on ABC. And this was one that I watched around ages 6 and 7 and absolutely adored, because it had a lot of the elements that made the other Disney afternoon shows work, but it was through the lens of like comic books and superheroes and things like that. And if you pay attention to kind of the aesthetics of the show and actually look into the behind the scenes development of the show, drew from a lot of different sources for inspiration. Comic books, Batman was a big influence. This is just a couple years after the Tim Burton Batman came out. And right before Batman the Animated Series came out, I think some people may think that this was kind of spoofing Batman the Animated Series, but it came out right before it, so it was just perfect timing, I guess. And it also draws a lot from things like The Shadow. If you look at Darkwing's outfit and costume and everything, it's clearly based on kind of those old-timey kind of superheroes from that era, from like the 40s and from a long time ago, The Shadow and things like that. And that made this show stand out even more, because it gave it a different dimension that maybe DuckTales didn't have, and maybe Gummy Bears didn't quite have, and Rescue Rangers didn't quite. I guess you could say they were kind of superheroes. But the very heavy comic book aesthetic of Darkwing Duck made it a huge standout in the Disney afternoon lineup. And it was great and very entertaining. So what was Darkwing Duck about? Well, Darkwing Duck was a hero of the city of St. Canard who fought crime, and he teamed up with DuckTale alumnus Launchpad McQuack, who became his sidekick, and his adopted daughter Goslin Mallard to become the terror that flaps in the night. And that's another thing about Darkwing. He's got a lot of catchphrases too, whether it be he is the terror that flaps in the night, along with whatever made-up line that Jim Cummings would come up with. And let's get dangerous. And even like he would do this thing where he was like congratulating himself and he would say, yep. And that kind of became like a Darkwing-ism. So very interesting in the development. And I mentioned Jim Cummings. I remember reading an interview with Jim Cummings where he said that Darkwing was his favorite role that he ever played for reasons of he was allowed to he was allowed to kind of ad-lib a lot more. And apparently a lot of those, I am the terror that flaps in the night, I am blank, blank, blank. Apparently Jim made up a lot of those himself. And they started scripting it that way, where it was like, Jim will make this line up. And he also, I remember him saying that he was happy that he finally got to play like a main character that would stand the test of time and be his own contribution to the world of animation. Because before, like, his biggest characters were like Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, who were already established characters, but here he kind of got to create his own character through the voice. And Darkwing in general was a great collaborative effort when you, again, go into the behind-the-scenes aspect of it, like a lot of the people that were involved in developing the character and turning him into what he became. And one thing that really strikes me... one thing that sticks out to me about Darkwing that's very interesting is that he's not a traditional Disney character. He actually almost feels like a Warner Brothers character because he is so egotistical and kind of a jerk and short-tempered at a lot of the times that it's almost like he almost feels like Daffy Duck at times. Like, this is, again, it's a Disney character and you expect him to be something like a Mickey Mouse. And if you look at the other Disney afternoon shows, even something like even Scrooge, who has his like jerkier tendencies, there's like a Disney element and personality to a lot of these characters. Darkwing very much feels like a Warner character, and like I said, obvious comparisons to Daffy Duck can be made. And there's a lot of goofy slapstick too. That's the other thing. Like they really leaned into like the cartoony kind of slapstick of this, to where it almost feels like old Warner shorts like Robin Hood Daffy and Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, which don't get me started on Looney Tunes and my favorite Looney Tunes shorts, because we'll be here all day. But it almost feels like that was an inspiration for this, because there are a lot of cartoon gags in this as well, and kind of gave Darkwing a different flavor that the other shows didn't have, because again, it had more of a Warner Brothers flair to it. It just did. It made me like Darkwing as a character because he was kind of a jerk, and he was an egotistical kind of hero, which was rare to see back in those days. And I think it's important to point out that Darkwing was not he was not stupid, and he was not incapable. He's not like Inspector Gadget, who was just completely useless and dumb as a post. Darkwing actually was very smart and very capable. It's just that his ego would get in the way, and he's also exceptionally clumsy, which is where all the slapstick comes in and everything blows up in his face. So he's got a lot of bad luck. And again, it invites comparisons to Daffy Duck. What separates him from Daffy Duck, though, is the father aspect, where he adopts Goslin in the pilot episode. And there's a lot of episodes and a lot of time dedicated to, like, normal family home life and him trying to raise a daughter, be a good parent. And when the time comes, he actually is like a really good parent and tries really hard to be a good role model and a good authority figure for Goslin, who probably needs it because she's a misbehaving little psychopath. And by the way, Goslin is like the best kid character out of any of the Disney afternoon shows, because she's just a rambunctious lunatic, and which, you know, that's how kids are. Like, I don't know if you've ever been around kids, but I always love a lot of these kids shows where they always portray the kids as like super smart, super capable, super able to understand everything that's going on. And Goslin is just this rambunctious, crazy person. I'm like, yeah, that's a kid. That's not that Goslin isn't smart. She is, but she's a kid first, and wonderfully voiced by the late great Christine Cavanaugh, who was also the voice of things like Chucky and Rugrats, and she had roles in Real Monsters and those type of shows. She was also Ug's girlfriend in Salute Your Shorts. Don't ask me how I remember all this, but she was also, probably her biggest role was Dexter. She was the voice of Dexter in Dexter's Lab, so the first voice, I should say. So legendary voice actress, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but her work as Goslin was very, very good, and including Launchpad in this was also kind of cool, because gave it like an extra connection to DuckTales, which also saw there were vague references to Duckburg and Scrooge McDuck. There were Gizmo Duck would show up once in a while, and there was actually a rivalry between Darkwing and Gizmo Duck in Darkwing's own mind, because he thought that Gizmo Duck was stealing his spotlight, which was kind of funny. And just whenever Gizmo Duck shows up and Darkwing gets all pissed off, it's actually kind of funny to see. And there's also that Barbara Walters parody reporter that was in DuckTales, and she shows up a couple of times in Darkwing Duck as well. There's a couple other cameos. There's one episode where like Magic and Dispel and the Beagle Boys and Glomgold get non-speaking roles, but they're all at like this resort for supervillains, and I'm like, that's kind of neat to see them all there. But having Launchpad there was kind of cool because he was a very well-liked character from DuckTales, so to see him pop up in a kind of a sister series or a spin-off show was nice to see. Although the creator of Darkwing Duck has since confirmed that Darkwing Duck and DuckTales don't exist in the same universe, which is a little weird because there's so many connections between them. But the continuity isn't great, so I kind of took the attitude was it was intended for them to be connected, but they didn't work too hard to connect them. So there are some breaks with continuity, but now the thing about Launchpad that doesn't make any sense is that he's Darkwing's sidekick, but he never wears an outfit. He never wears a costume or adopts like a super kick or a sidekick identity. So it's like, how do people not know? Because Launchpad lives with Drake Mallard, which is Darkwing's real name. He lives with Drake Mallard and Goslin. And how has nobody figured out that, like, hey, maybe the guy that lives with Launchpad is also Darkwing Duck? I don't know. You think the villains would figure that out. But in any case, you do get this nice balance of, like, superhero type of stuff with, like, there's, like, horror stories and science fiction stories, but there's also this mix of, like, real-life suburbia with Darkwing trying to raise his daughter and annoying next-door neighbors called the Muddlefoots who irritate him to no end. So maybe that's why I didn't like Goof Troop that much, because Goof Troop was almost all about, like, suburbia and, you know, family life and sitcom-y type of stuff. Darkwing covered that and also gave me a bunch of extra stuff, too. So I was like, what do I need Goof Troop for? I've got Darkwing Duck. Like, we're all good here. We're fine. And another major appealing thing about the show were the villains. It was almost like the Adam West Batman series, whereas like half the fun was seeing which villain was going to show up this week. Whether it be the electricity-based one, Megavolt, who's greatly voiced by Dan Castellaneta, most known for being on The Simpsons as Homer Simpson and Krusty the Clown and various other characters. But he gives Megavolt like this really great, like kind of nerdy voice. That's great. And there's also Bushroot, who's the plant-based one, kind of has connections to like Swamp Thing, maybe Poison Ivy a little bit, and there's some great episodes with him. There's Nega Duck, who is the evil version of Darkwing Duck. There's actually, and this is a weird thing, there's actually two versions of Nega Duck. There's one episode where Darkwing gets split into his good and evil halves, kind of like that old episode of Star Trek with Kirk, where he gets split into his passive good side and his aggressive evil side. And they do something like that here with Darkwing. And the dark half is called Nega Duck. But there's another Nega Duck that shows up, and he's in the yellow suit, with the yellow, black, and red suit, which is a callback to the Flash, and his enemy, the Reverse Flash, which I thought was a very clever color scheme to give Nega Duck, just to make that reference. And he's explained as coming from the Negaverse, which is like an alternate universe to Darkwing's, and he's the evil version of Darkwing Duck from that universe. So why they gave two different origins to one character and created two separate versions of one character, I don't know. But Nega Duck is hilarious because it's Jim Cummings' chance to just completely cut loose and just be as evil and as sinister as he wants. And Nega Duck is one of those characters where his sole character is, I am evil, and that's it. And he's just hilariously evil and over the top, and it's kind of funny. And there's a few other ones. There's Steelbeak, who's kind of like this James Bond villain. He's like a rooster with a metal mouth, so it's like that's a reference to Jaws, obviously. And he works for the Felonious Organization of World Larceny, FOWL, which recently just showed up in the new DuckTales show as well. Many of the villains join up together to form the Fearsome Five. It's led by Nega Duck. Also includes Megavolt, Bushroot, Quackerjack, who's kind of like the... I'm sure people would compare him to the Joker, but to me, he's more of like the Toy Man from Superman. And the Liquidator, who's like Hydro Man from Spider-Man, with water powers. And they're the Fearsome Five. And that leads to Darkwing forming his own group of superheroes, the Justice Ducks. And that's one of the more memorable episodes in the series. It's a two-parter. So that's all great. And so they had a really good rogues gallery there for this show, and a lot of great villains. Not all of them were winners. There was Jambalaya Jake, who was not one of the better ones, unfortunately. But generally, they had some pretty good villains. Some of them had like weird puns, like there was a mole villain named Moriarty, and I'm like, ha ha, I get that. That's funny. There's the film director one, Toscanini, who's like a big walrus that's like a film director. I'm like, that's that's a very odd creation, but hey, whatever. And so there was no shortage of fun on this show. Like they had enough villains and enough characters and enough situations to where they could almost tell any story they wanted, and it was always a lot of fun. And there would be guest stars like Darkwing's girlfriend, Morgana Macabre, who's kind of like an Addams Family type of character, who's really creepy and weird, and she's got magical powers, and she starts off as a bad guy and then becomes his girlfriend, and they do some actually really funny stuff with her. And it's just a very entertaining show all the way through. And again, if you like superhero stuff, you like comic book stuff, I think Darkwing Duck is a standout series. Now, I will warn you, as I tend to do with these Disney afternoon shows on Disney+, if you're watching the show on Disney+, the order of the episodes, and I talked about it with Tailspin, I talked about it with Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, where the pilot episode is somewhere in the middle. And so the ordering of the episodes is very weird. Darkwing Duck, the order of the episodes is absolutely insane. Like, it's so out of whack, it's baffling that they put it up the way that they did. Now, apparently this is caused by... They had the syndicated 65-episode run that aired first-run syndication on Disney Afternoon, but they also had episodes airing on Saturdays on ABC. And those two sets of episodes are treated as... on most episode guides, they're treated as separate seasons, but on Disney Plus, they're combined into one full season. And it causes a lot of like weird, out of order situations to take place. I talked about Gizmo Duck. Gizmo Duck's introduction episode into the Darkwing Duck series is somewhere in the 70s, and all of his other episodes take place before it. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever. The Justice Ducks episode, the two-parter, it's placed in a situation where a lot of the characters that are featured in that haven't been introduced yet, based on the order that's in Disney Plus. As opposed to the other one that I talked about. Again, it's very confusing. And just the ordering of the episodes is just so out of whack that I don't understand what happened when putting these things on Disney Plus. And again, the pilot episode is somewhere in the 30s, which is even more confusing. But just keep that in mind. I'm sure you can find a list online of like the proper chronological order of the Darkwing Duck episodes. But on Disney Plus, it is a complete and utter mess. And I've heard that X-Men is the same way, where like the ordering of the X-Men episodes is just completely out of sync and completely just boned beyond all comprehension. So it's like, that's something to look forward to, because that was the next show I was going to watch on Disney Plus. But as far as like the Disney afternoon shows, I think I'm done with that. I've rewatched all the ones that I wanted to rewatch. Like I said before, I have no connection to Goof Troop and all the other shows like Quack Pack and Mighty Ducks, and but there were some other ones like I forget, what was it, Schnookums and Meat, like that Ren and Stimpy ripoff or whatever that was. I have no connection to those shows. I didn't really like those shows that much. The Disney afternoon shows I liked were DuckTales, Gummy Bears, Tailspin, Rescue Rangers, Darkwing Duck, and Gargoyles. Those were my shows. And everything else, I'm like, meh, like, you know, I'm fine. I don't need to rewatch them. I'm totally fine. So, that is that. Darkwing Duck, it gets a thumbs up from me. Just beware of the episode order. And I think now is a good time to really get back into Darkwing Duck now that he's back in the new DuckTales series and there's possibility of a spin-off show bringing him back as a lead character of his own series. So I think now's a good time to go back and check out Darkwing Duck. It's a lot of fun, it's entertaining, and I think it's great. Now let's cover 3 sequels that are part of a series and are actually sequels to one of the most classic horror movies ever made, Psycho. Now, I've talked about the original Psycho before. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's a classic. It's one of my all-time favorites. One of my favorite Hitchcock films. One of my favorite horror films. One of my favorite suspense thrillers. Psycho is an absolute classic. I never wanted to, nor did I ever have any interest in checking out any sequels to it, because I very much like when you have a movie that gets the reputation of being one of the most classic films ever made, whether it be Jaws or The Exorcist, I get like the impression that the sequels are probably garbage. And it's happened to a lot of those movies that get like a very high mark with the first movie, and then they just tank with the second. Silence of the Lambs, great example. Silence of the Lambs, great movie. Hannibal, piece of shit. Jodie Foster was wise to not do it. That's all I'll say. But so I just kind of wrote off the Psycho sequels because I thought, oh, it's like the Jaws sequels. It's like Exorcist 2. It's like, although Exorcist 3 is not bad. It's just like those sequels. It's going to be absolute fucking garbage. And then I saw Red Letter Media's review of the Psycho sequels, the full Psycho series. I was like, you know what? Maybe I should check these out because they actually do look interesting. So I checked out Psycho 2, Psycho 3, and Psycho 4, encompassing the entirety of the Psycho film series, or at least the films that star Anthony Perkins. There are other elements of the Psycho series. There's the books, which I haven't read, to be perfectly honest. There's also the Bates Motel series, which I tell people all the time, it started off slow. The first couple seasons are a little rough. But once you get to season 3, it's all gold. And seasons 4 and 5 is some of my favorite television I've seen in the last decade. I swear to God. The entire series is on Netflix, so if you want to watch it, go check it out on Netflix. But so I really like Bates Motel. But I had no interest in checking out the Psycho sequels until I saw Red Letter Media's video, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll give it another shot. And I watched them, and I did not hate them. Generally, I think Psycho 3 is the weakest one. It's directed by Anthony Perkins this time around. I think he made a few weird decisions stylistically. The film doesn't look that great, and some of the story decisions are a little odd. But even then, they do some things that are a little different from what you would expect out of a Psycho sequel. It's like, oh, Norman gets a girlfriend, and there's a twist on the shower scene that I actually legit kind of surprised me. So I was like, all right. There's something there. Even in the weakest one, there's something there. The best of the three is Psycho 2, which is, takes place 20 plus years after the original film. And it's about a rehabilitated Norman trying to fit back into society. And other forces, whether it be the mother personality or Marion Crane's sister from the first movie, returning and wanting to out him as a psychopathic killer, and saying that he's just going to do it again. A lot of different forces that are kind of playing on Norman and kind of pushing him into his worser tendencies, shall we say, and trying to get the psycho to come back out. And I thought it was very effective in that. I was actually pleasantly surprised by this movie. It was a lot more psychological than I was expecting. Because this is the era when, the slasher movies were starting up. You were starting to get, the Friday the 13th, the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, Nightmare on Elm Street was just a couple years away. It was that era where it's just blood and guts, which I didn't think Psycho would fit into that. Psycho is a lot more about tension and the psychological horror of Norman Bates' character and his personality, or dual personality, and all that stuff. And I thought sequels made in the 80s are just going to go for full-on slasher movie schlock. And they didn't do that here. I was pleasantly surprised. There are bits of violence, for sure, but it wasn't like a typical slasher movie. I thought Psycho 2 was actually fairly well done, fairly well built, generally well-made sequel that has a twist at the end that's a little silly, but overall, I was pleasantly surprised by Psycho 2. And it's a worthy sequel. And it also helps that you have Anthony Perkins through all three films. I think having that consistency and that continuity of the performance, and Anthony Perkins is still able to deliver such solid performances even after taking a break from the character for 20 plus years. I think he does a really good job. Probably wouldn't use him as a director, because like I said, Psycho 3 is the weakest, but, excuse me. But I think his presence adds a lot to the film and adds to the tragedy of Norman's character, where it's almost like the world is working against him. It's like they want him to be that psycho character, and he almost can't break away from it no matter what he does. And having that consistency with Norman's character, I think, helped out a lot with these sequels. And Psycho 2, I think, fared the best of the bunch. It's also nice to see it in color and see the classic Bates Motel in all its glory, and the Bates household in all its glory, and those type of fan servicey kind of money shots that you get. But Psycho 2, I think, was easily the best one of the bunch, and I was, like I said, pleasantly surprised. Psycho 3, a little bit tougher to get through, but I didn't hate it. And then you get to Psycho 4, the beginning, which has a very interesting setup. Now, it doesn't completely line up with how Psycho 3 ended, which is a little weird because Psycho 3 made it look like Norman was going to be put away forever. And then Psycho 4 starts off and he's like living in a home again. He's been rehabilitated and he's married and about ready to have a kid. I'm like, that's a little different from how Psycho 3 ended, but okay. That we'll just write it off as like, he got rehabilitated again. He met his wife in the mental institution. It's like, okay, I'll go with it. And he's been rehabilitated again. Okay. And basically most of the movie is Norman Bates relaying his childhood via flashbacks as he's telling it to a radio host personality. And you basically get Norman Bates' backstory through these flashbacks. And some of it is effective. His mother is, of course, a domineering, crazy woman, played by Olivia Hussey. And I thought she did, for the role she was given, I thought she did a decent job. Unfortunately, I think this movie's kind of tainted by Bates Motel. Bates Motel, to me, even though it doesn't line up in the continuity of the original film, to me, it's a much better showing of that mother-son relationship and just how fucked up it was. It also helps you add Freddie Highmore and Vera Farmiga doing the performances, and they completely hit it out of the park. Did a great job all around, but the relationship was so codependent and so unhealthy because they fed into each other's worser tendencies and made excuses for their worser tendencies, which just created bad things down the road. Psycho 4 presents their relationship where she's basically abusive and psychologically abusive, and she probably has bipolar disorder herself, so she doesn't know what's going on half the time, and it's a lot more fucked up. But that felt like it was going more for shock value more than it was like what Bates Motel did, which is a lot more... It's weird in Bates Motel, but it's a lot more believable, I think, because nobody's outwardly trying to ruin the other. And it's not obviously abusive, but it is in a sense where the mother in particular just keeps making the wrong decisions on how to deal with Norman. And here it's like she's a friggin' crazy person, which I guess lines up with how the first movie portrayed her and how the first movie explained her away. But... the flashbacks, there's some good moments there, and I like the format of him relaying this entire... I would have liked it if the entire movie was just Norman talking to the radio show host. I think that would have been great if they had done that. I should also note that this movie debuted on Showtime, so it's almost a made-for-TV movie. It kind of has that quality to it, kind of a lessened quality, but because it was on Showtime, they got away with a little bit of nudity and some cursing and some blood, so a little bit more intense than your typical made-for-TV movie, but... it feels like a made-for-TV movie, given the production value and the budget of it. But it has its moments. You got CCH Pounder as the radio show host, and I like her. I liked her a lot as Amanda Waller in the Justice League cartoon, and she's got a great voice, so it's not too hard to believe that she would be a radio show host. I think that Psycho 4 is admirable. It's not great. But, again, it has its moments. And I guess I'll give that much credit. None of the Psycho sequels, with my super low expectations, none of them veered into that this is the worst thing I've ever seen type of territory. It wasn't an Exorcist 2. It wasn't a Jaws 3 and 4. It wasn't one of those. It was all three movies. Again, Psycho's the best. And 3 and 4 are kind of but they don't venture into that, oh my god, this is the biggest piece of shit I've ever seen. And to that end, I give it credit. These are movies that by all rights should have never worked, probably should have never been made. But for what they were, I got some entertainment out of them, and I enjoyed them. And it was nice to see Anthony Perkins again. So, again, maybe they just succeeded in low expectations, but generally I wasn't... too bothered by these movies. Again, if you're going to watch any of them, watch Psycho 2. I think that's the one that's most worthy of being watched. 3 and 4, watch them if you're curious, but they're absolutely easily skippable. But if you do watch them, you probably won't be miserable while watching them, which in of itself is an accomplishment. Okay, next up is another horror movie that was recommended to me by Red Letter Media. I checked out their Half in the Bag episode and saw the review of this and decided to check it out myself. And this is a movie that actually came out this year, Relic, an independent film. To my understanding, the director is a first-time director, and the reaction to this film has been very split. You get, people who like slower, tension-building, atmospheric-type horror movies seem to love it. People who want blood, guts, and just a flat-out creature feature seem to hate it. And it's one of those movies, kind of like the Babadook got kind of a similar reaction. And I'll be honest, I love the Babadook. I thought the Babadook was great. It was one of my favorite movies of the last decade. But I liked it for that slow tension build-up and the obvious allegory to depression and how depression can like tear a family apart and everything like that. The creature itself wasn't much more than an allegory or a metaphor. And I liked that. And so I was okay with it not being a complete blood and guts splatterfest. If you can do something that's atmospheric, creepy, and quite honestly smartly written and believable with the performances that were on display. And that's kind of what I expected Relic to be based on Red Letter Media's review and based on how people were reacting to it. And that's kind of what it is. Unfortunately, I think the Babadook is better. The Babadook is more memorable, but the Relic, what it does, it's basically a look into the evil that is slowly possessing the old woman, which you can see in the poster here, is an obvious allegory for like Alzheimer's disease and getting older and losing your mental faculties and that type of stuff, and that kind of tragedy that goes along with that. And I think to that end, it's admirable. I think it does an admirable job with it. And again, it's appropriately atmospheric and spooky and everything. And the acting is generally okay. I just, the entire time I was watching it, I was just kind of like, it just feels like a lesser Babadook, if that makes any sense. I've seen this type of movie before, and I've seen it done better. But I didn't hate it, and I think for a first-time director, I think there are a lot of admirable qualities about it as well. Again, the atmosphere is appropriately spooky, and the performances are generally solid. And the subject matter that they decided to tackle with this, I think, is pretty good. A pretty good one to tackle. And I was generally impressed with the effort more than I was the execution. Maybe it's one of those things, and I don't know what the budget restrictions were, but it could have used like a few other like big scares, I think. But or maybe even it could have just been a short film. You probably could have done this in like 15-20 minutes, and I think it would have been super, super effective. But for what it is, I think it's an interesting little independent film that got released in a year where we're all starved for material because of COVID taking the movie theaters away from us. So I was okay with it. I thought it was solid. I didn't love it, and I certainly didn't hate it. So the negative crowd, I didn't line up with them. But the people that loved it, I was kind of like, it's fine. I didn't fall in love with this movie like some other people did, but I was generally okay with it. It was an admirable effort at that kind of slow burn atmospheric horror movie. So I was okay with it. Now, next up is a movie that I have seen sequels to it, but I've never watched the original, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to watch the original. Pumpkinhead. Let me get the picture sound. Yeah, Pumpkinhead. I've seen a couple of the sequels, but I've never actually watched the original Pumpkinhead, and that feels like a disservice, so I'm like, all right, let me check this thing out. The one that started it all and gave us the Pumpkinhead series, I guess you would call it. Ridiculous name, but actually fairly effective horror movie. I was really impressed with it. I like the concept of a grieving father who wants vengeance on these unsuspecting teenagers that accidentally killed his son through a wild accident. Just teenagers being dumb teenagers, as they are in these movies. And they accidentally killed his son. And Lance Henriksen, who plays the father, gives a great performance, I think. He really elevates the entire film. And he gets together with this witch, and they summon the vengeful spirit of Pumpkinhead, a demon that they use to kill off the teenagers one by one. So in a lot of ways, sounds like fairly typical kind of horror slasher type of deal, but I think the whole setup of, first of all, it kind of feels like I Know What You Did Last Summer a little bit, where the victims are the ones that brought about their own demise by doing something horrible, and then somebody takes them and they do it in the form of this alien-looking like demon called Pumpkinhead. Again, the name's ridiculous, but the overall movie is great. And I like the setting of like this simple kind of farmland area in the middle of nowhere. And like I said, Lance Henriksen gives a very good performance. The special effects on the creature, Pumpkinhead itself, I think are handled fairly well, mainly because they shoot it in the dark and they have some effective puppet work and everything else, and it looks great. And you get, when it comes time to get the killings out of the way, I think the movie delivers on those. I think the witch, for lack of a better term, I forget what she's called in the film. The witch is effectively creepy, and it works as kind of like the voice the mouthpiece for the monster in that regard. And yeah, I think it's a really solid movie. And I'm glad I finally got around to seeing it. I feel like this is one I should have seen years ago, but just kind of escaped my notice. Again, I've seen the sequels, but not the original. So it was nice to finally remedy that. And fortunately, I got a pretty good movie out of it. And next up is a movie I saw last year and loved, and I watched it again this week, and I'm glad I did because I think I liked it more the second time around. Ready or Not. It's a movie that is a lot of fun. It's got a lot of comedic elements to it, but it's also got a lot of great like violence and horror elements to it. And I'm trying not to give away too much, so I don't expect me to say too much about this film because I'm trying to keep as much of it a surprise as possible for those who haven't seen it. But I really like the cast. You get Samara Weaver, who is Samara Weaving, who is Hugo Weaving's niece, I believe. And she actually recently popped up in the third Bill and Ted film as who was she? She was Little Ted, I believe. And she is the star in this. On her wedding night, her husband's family drags her into a family ritual where they play a game on the wedding night whenever a new person is brought into the family. And this leads to them playing a game of hide and seek in the family mansion. And that's all I'm going to say about the plot because you guys need to go see this thing because it's a lot of fun. It's very tense and dramatic and absolutely worth a watch. It feels like something that could have been made in the 80s. It has kind of that flair to it. Again, I talk about building tension and all that stuff. I think this movie does that effectively and does it very, very well. And there's it's just surprise after surprise after surprise. And like I said, I like the cast. Samara Weaving does a very good job. I love how her character evolves throughout the course of the film. And by the end of the film, she's almost like a completely different person. I love that. Andie MacDowell is in this as her mother-in-law. And I love Andie MacDowell. She was in Groundhog Day, which is one of my favorite movies. And she's great here as well. And the whole cast in general, I think, is very, very good. And again, this is one of those movies where it's just surprise after surprise after surprise, and all the cast members get their time to shine. It's a great ensemble piece, I'll say. And if you're looking for something fun to watch in October, I think this is an absolutely great one to check out. I'm deliberately keeping the details on this light because I don't want to spoil anything. But if you're a fan of movies like... I'm trying to compare it to something. Kind of like... It's got kind of an Evil Dead kind of comedic vibe to it, almost like a Sam Raimi comedic vibe to it. It's not as violent as Evil Dead, and it's not supernatural like Evil Dead is. Well, it's not supernatural to the extent that Evil Dead is. We'll put it that way. But it does have that kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge type of attitude to it that Evil Dead 2 especially has. And I think it's worth checking out. So if you have not seen Ready or Not yet, make time for it this October. I think it's absolutely worth a look. I think it's great. It's, again, one of my favorite movies I've seen in the last few years. And I don't think anybody will be disappointed with this. I think it's great. All right, and that wraps up this video. Thanks again, everybody, for checking it out. Like I said, you'll have reviews of Bound for Glory and Hell in a Cell coming up sometime Monday or Tuesday. We've got the next episode of Weekday Warriors of Wrestling coming up, so check out that channel. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment down below. Links to the Weekday Warriors of Wrestling channel is in the description here. And, of course, like and subscribe to that channel as well as this one. Comment down below. All support is appreciated. So thanks again, everybody, for checking me out, and I will see you all later. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.